With conference realignment being a pressing issue, Dabo Swinney had some comments on Tuesday about how he felt regarding the ACC on a specific topic.
You are Locked On Clemson, your daily podcast on the Clemson Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Clemson podcast. Hey, we're so glad that you are here. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Locked On Clemson podcast. My name is John Bivens. I'm your host. You can follow us over on Twitter or X at I am John Bivens. Thanks for making Locked On Clemson your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast at and over on YouTube. We are a part of the amazing Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. After you listen to this show, make sure you go give your second listen of the day to the Locked On ACC show, where they dive into the whole ACC as a conference. With Clemson, you never know. We could be saying Big 12 show soon. But here on Locked On Clemson, you're getting three things. You're getting all sports, all passion, all of the time. Today's a very special episode. It is Wednesday, July 17th. We're going to be talking about Dabo's comments on the ACC. We're also going to go in. Garrett Riley had some interesting comments. He talked about offensive leadership and what players are showing there. And he also talked about this dreaded battle for the QB2 this year, which is more important than you might think. We are grateful for all of our sponsors that make this show possible, and make sure you give some love to all of them. But conference realignment is on the toes, right? Is Clemson going to the Big 12? Are they staying in the ACC? Are they going to the SEC? What's going to happen? This is a huge topic that everyone's talking about. Honestly, our thoughts is I think we're going to the Big 12. I don't know if that's what I want, but I do think that's what's going to happen eventually. SEC came out, their commissioner was asked about all this stuff, and he responded at their media day opening conference. He said, hey, we're focusing on our 16 schools right now. We're not focusing on others. So makes it pretty clear he's not looking to add some schools right now. But anyway, this whole topic is very upbeat right now. Like, it's getting a lot of traction. That's what most people are talking about, especially Clemson for Are they going to leave? Are they going to stay? What's going to happen with this court? Well, Tuesday, all the coaches got together for some media for some press with the media on Tuesday, and Dabo had some comments on a certain topic. So back in May, ESPN reached out to ACC, which then reached out to Clemson, asking Clemson if they would move their Clemson versus South Carolina game this year up to Friday, to Black Friday rather than the Saturday. You see, for over 60 years, Clemson and South Carolina have played each other every single week, and for over 60 years, it's been 2 days after Thanksgiving on that Saturday. That's tradition. It bounces back and forth with locations. That's where it has been. I think it's for like 64 years. For 64 years they play. It hasn't happened earlier in November. Since 2006, it's happened on that Saturday. But Swinney, who's been in there since 2003, who's worked at Clemson since 2003. He's entering his 16th full season as the coach there. He had some responses to it. So, like I said, ESPN asked ACC, who asked Clemson to move their South Carolina game from Friday to Saturday, because ESPN said they wanted to show a different game on the Saturday slot. Dabo responded with no. He said that's not what works best for this community. That's not what's best for Clemson. That isn't what's best for the community as a whole. Now, if they want to do that in Columbia next year, that's fine. But we don't want to do that. That isn't what works best. ACC didn't handle that back and forth. This is Dabo Swinney's comments on it. They asked him about it at this comment on Tuesday. Dabo said this. He said, Graham Neff did ask my opinion for that. Neff's our athletic director. He said, I was against it for several reasons. I said, I'm happy to go do it in Columbia if that's what they want to do. But I was against it because I don't think that's what's best for Clemson. He talked about some business concerns, some logistic concerns for the city of Clemson, which is one of the smaller cities, honestly, that host a national Power 4 athletics program. But yeah, so they talked about that. The last time they hosted a non-Saturday game, I believe it was on a Thursday against Georgia Tech in 2019. But Swinney went on and said this. He said, I think sometimes we forget to do what's best for Clemson. Talking about the city and the culture, not just the football team. He said, move the game to Friday is not what's best for this town. It's not what's best for this community. This is not some big city. You know, the people in this town, they make their heyday off those Saturdays. And he went in and talked about the current scheduling lineup and how students are away from campus on Thanksgiving break. They travel away. Talking about the student athletes now, he say Thanksgiving's a big family holiday. So students they go with their family families on Thursday. Friday allows them to have a travel day to wherever they're going, and then Saturday is game day. If they move that game to Friday, well, now they lose that day in between the holidays. So now students are probably going to lose that holiday with their families. He went on, and he wasn't done. He kept saying, he said, again, I've been here for 22 years, so that's my perspective. What's best for our students, what's best for our town, what's best for our fans, and what's best for recruiting too. That's usually a big official weekend for us as well, and now you're trying to get recruits to leave their homes on Thanksgiving. That's hard to do, and some of them are still playing on Fridays. So great points. When it comes down to moving this game, he was going, look, I know it's for media rating, for TV rating, it might help y'all, but recruits are not going to leave Thanksgiving and come down there, and if they do, they're being like, oh, I'm going to go to a school that doesn't prioritize family time, which is a big thing for a lot of recruits. But then it's also saying now it's not going to help our city. Clemson, all the businesses thrive on game days, the bars, the shops, the restaurants. Moving that to Friday, Black Friday, that's going to hurt business there. It's going to be a less attended game due to the student athletes going home or due to the students and the fans going home around that holiday. It's a big time. One ACC official said in an email to Graham Neff back in May that the conference was disappointed in Clemson's, this is their quote, lack of cooperation on the matter, adding that other schools in the conference that have moved days and been willing to move rivalry games to Black Friday in the past, talking about NC State, North Carolina, Georgia Tech when they played Georgia, and then Virginia and Virginia Tech playing there as well. Clemson, they said no, so they will still host South Carolina on Saturday, November 30th, that final week of the regular season. And then this is what kept going. And Michael Strickland, he's a part of the ACC, he said this, which were revealed in the court hearing. So we're just now hearing all these comments now because the court made these public. And it says this: as all ACC members know, it is incumbent upon the ACC and its institutions to work in good faith with ESPN on football scheduling issues. This corporation maximizes the value of our relationship with our media partner and strengthens our collective future. Clemson's decision not to do so in this instant is harmful toward the goal. And then Dabo Swinney responded and said this after he said, if he wants to go down there and play on Friday night, that's sure we'll do it. But these Saturdays in the Valley are special. They mean a lot to the fan base here. Again, feels a normal week and we're in school and things like that. Maybe we could have a little bit of a different conversation, but that isn't something that I'm looking for. What does this mean? Well, we're in the middle of this negotiation, this court case, this period where Clemson is upset with the ACC. That's what's happening. And now, all of a sudden, we have a whole new can of worms where Dabo is upset because ACC's upset with Dabo. So now Clemson and Dabo have another level of upsetness between each other over priority of what's the priority. Is the priority best for the university? Is it best for the recruits, best for the fans, best for the students? Or is it best for TV ratings? Dabo Swinney took one side, ACC leaned on another. So we're in the middle of all this battle. We're in the middle of hot topic, Clemson being rumored to go to the Big 12. And now we get another thing where Dabo and the ACC is upset. It sounds like Dabo isn't on the side of the ACC. I mean, he's not. It's different there. Could this be a factor? When it comes down to it, could this be another factor of the ACC's priority compared to where Dabo and Clemson's priority is at? Could that be a factor moving forward, looking for another conference? I'm sure we will see very soon when it comes down to that, but it's very interesting to think about that even something as small as this could make such a big deal as moving conferences. So we'll keep monitoring the situation. We'll keep updating on this conference realignment as news breaks. When we come back, the rest of the episode, we're going to dive strictly onto the football field. We're going to talk about some Garrett Riley's comments that he had in a recent interview. We'll talk about that and more in just a second.
This episode of Locked On Clemson is brought to you by FanDuel. Guess what, guys? I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. Whew, man, FanDuel has got you covered. FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, dream up some bets anytime I'm in the mood. I'm telling you guys, it's at your leisure. You can be laying on the couch, twinkling your little toes, and you say, you know what? I want to drop a bet in this bad boy right now. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. Yes, every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sportsbook betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Here we are on the Locked On Clemson show. Man, I love that guy. Jarvis is such an amazing guy. He helps us lead the college channels, and he also leads a Locked On Atlanta show where he dives into all sports within the city of Atlanta. I love that. He literally just said, laying on the couch, twinkling your little toes, hop on your phone. Man, that guy's awesome. I love him. Make sure you dive into, give his podcast a listen. Give the Locked On Atlanta City Sports Show a listen wherever you listen on audio format, Spotify, podcast, all that. But you can also listen over on YouTube. But diving back into Clemson, like we said, for the rest of the episode, we are jumping in and we're going to be all about all here on the field, talking about on the field things. Garrett Riley came out in that same, or in a very similar conversation. People were asking him all kinds of questions. They were asking him questions about offensive leadership, about wide receiver rooms, about running back rooms, about offensive linemen, about improvements over the summer, about all this different things, fall camp. And really two things really came to mind and really were kind of surprising his comment. The first is this. They asked him about offensive leadership. As we've mentioned, as you know, as anybody who has watched Clemson football throughout the years, even if you just watch a game every year, if you go through, find a random game from 2016 to now, you will see 2016, 17, 18, 19, prime, right? Playing weight. Even 2020 was great. 21, 22, 23, it's lower, definitely a lower level. Some would even say it's declining. And part of the reason to that is obviously quarterback play. I think another reason to this, and a lot of people would agree, is that it's a leadership problem. I'm not specifically saying offensive coordinator, stuff like that, although there definitely has been some struggles there. I'm more leaning on-field leadership. What players are taking charge? When we had Deshaun Watson, there was no question he was the leader. Maybe not freshman year, but even freshman year, he was out front, he was leading. Trevor Lawrence was a leader. I'm telling you, that man was a leader out the womb. You look at any level he's played in, he's been one of the leaders on his teams. And that didn't change at Clemson. Even at Jacksonville, his first year with Urban Meyer, which was a train wreck. I mean, let's rewind and think about that time. Urban Meyer got caught in a bar with a girl, ugly play calling, poor decisions. I feel bad for Trevor. He didn't get a true rookie year, but even that year, he was a leader on that Jaguar squad. Now, Garrett Riley, they asked him about offensive leader on the field, and it naturally came up in one question, and he mentioned how there's this growing leadership in the locker room, especially on the offensive side, that there's this growing leadership potential. And they asked him, they said, so what's your thoughts? Who's going to be the leader? Who's going to come in, and who do you think is going to be the leader of the squad? And he mentioned 5 different players' names about the potential of leadership and what each of them brought to the table. The first one he mentioned was Phil Maffa. Right off the bat, they said, you mentioned offensive leadership. Who are some of those leaders on the field? First person he said is Phil Maffa. And his leadership isn't your normal leadership. When you hear leadership, especially in a football sense, you think of a player hyping up the huddle. You think of someone getting onto his guys, both encouraging and kind of helping. All right, let's correct this. Let me give you some tough love here. Be better. He mentioned Phil Maffa, who has a different leadership side, and he's described as a quiet leader. Garrett Riley said that he is making improvements. He's jumping in. He's the RB1 spot solely with Will Shipley drafted, saying that Phil Maffa is truly a quiet leader. And instead of leading through words and speeches and hypeness and all this, he's leading through 2 things, and they're 2 things that matter the most. He's leading through his actions, and he's leading through his plays. Phil Maffa is a leader of this offense. Sometimes you'll see running backs be that leadership role. It's nowhere near as often as a quarterback. I'd even say it's not as often as a wide receiver, but you've had some. Saquon Barkley was a leader at Penn State. Phil Maffa has that potential, and Garrett Riley says he is one. He says that Phil is always doing the right thing, always putting in the work, always showing the effort, and is leading through his actions and through his plays. He then mentioned one that you honestly don't hear a lot of being a leader on the field, but he mentioned the tight end. He mentioned Jake Brennenstuhl. Jake is a talented player. In 2023, he had 50 receptions for 498 yards, 5 touchdowns. He averaged like almost 10 or about 10 yards every catch. He had a great game. There were some games that we would have been in a lot bigger trouble if he wasn't there. But he's athletic, he's skillful, Garrett Riley in this comment mentioned how Jake Brenningstool is also an offensive leader on this field. He talked about he's not necessarily set in stone as the leader, but he's someone, his words were improving and emerging as a leader in this squad. Talked about how this summer he's made a huge jump in maturity. Says this summer he's made a huge jump from being just another talented player to truly being a leader on this team. So he's maturing, he's emerging as a leader. Jake Brenningstool last year, something about him just seemed like a young player. He's a senior now, so this is his 4th year at Clemson. But with that being said, last year watching, there were some times where it's just like, is this guy a freshman? Just the way he reacted, the way he got onto people, the way he kind of celebrated in some spots is like, is this guy a freshman? Am I missing something? Garrett Riley says that's gone. He says he's maturing. He's truly going to develop into a leader, this squad. He then mentioned someone that a lot of people would expect him to mention first, and he talked about Cade Klubnik. Cade is someone we're going to dive into more about what he talked about Cade in our next segment as we talk about that battle for the QB2. Not that Cade is battling for a quarterback too, but we'll talk about those comments in that segment. But then he wrapped up with who is the offensive leaders on this style, and he mentioned 2 players on the offensive line. Again, if you look at through the years, you would see a difference between prime Clemson, 16 to 20, with a great offensive line, moving the ball, running the ball, giving the quarterback time, good offensive line. Past couple years, they've been questionable. They've collapsed. The pocket has been collapsed more. Our rush game was nowhere near what it has been in the past couple years as what it was. Our offensive line is something that has been a problem. That is why we have a new offensive line coach with Matt Luke coming in. And Garrett Riley gave him the credit. He said that they've got a squad coming up. There's a couple leaders on that offensive line that can make a true difference on the offensive side. And those players are Tristan Lee and Blake Miller. Tristan Lee, according to 24/7, he's a great recruit. He came in number 16 in the nation, 4th offensive tackle, 2nd from Virginia in the class of 2021. He's from Virginia. He's 6'6", 317 pounds. This guy's talented. This guy's a big player. He's a great player. And Garrett Riley says he's going to be someone that comes in and is a leader. Another one was Blake Miller. Blake Miller was nowhere near that kind of recruit. Tristan Lee was a 5-star recruit, 98 composite score. Blake Miller was an 89 composite score, only a 3-star recruit. 31 offensive tackle, 14th out of a state of Ohio. He was that class of 2022, so he's a little bit younger. But either way, Garrett Riley came out and he flat out said those 2 are going to be the ones that lead that offensive line. These 2 players are going to have a major impact because our offensive line will only be as good as Blake Miller and Tristan Lee. If they're discouraged, if they're blowing up, if they're not having the potential that they can live up to, if they're not leading into that, playing into that potential, that talent, that skill, none of the rest of the offensive line will either. And I'm really counting on Garrett Riley and Matt Luke to continue to help these people grow, help them grow to be leaders on that offensive front so we can get back to having time in the pocket. We can get back to having a strong rushing game throughout the game because that's important. It's important for that to happen. So those are the leaders on the field. Garrett Riley was asked, who's the leaders? In our offensive leadership, Phil Maffa, Jake Brenningstool, Cade Klubnik, Tristan Lee, and Blake Miller. That's talented. Those are great 5 players right there. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to keep this conversation going about Garrett Riley's comments regarding the offense as he talk about the battle for the QB2 role. We'll be back in just a second. Welcome back to the Locked On Clemson podcast. I'm your host, John Bivens. Welcome to America's Best Clemson podcast. So in that same interview we're talking about, Garrett Riley was speaking to the coaches or speaking to media. They were asking them questions, diving into all different kinds of things. And they asked him about the QB2 role. They asked who is going to be second in the depth chart. Before we can dive into that, we really got to talk about QB1, which is Cade Klubnik. As we just mentioned, Garrett Riley mentioned Cade is continuing to improve as a leader, saying that you can expect him to be that leader role. He's growing vocally, growing confidently. He talked about something that I think a lot of people see this, but not a lot of people talk about, and that's this topic. When you watch Cade, he can be kind of twitchy. When I say that, I mean like It's very much like he's in the pocket and he's very he's very hyper. He's an active guy on and off the field. He's very much like that. He reminds me of a high school quarterback player. That's no slack to the guy at all, but that's just what he is. Garrett Riley says this summer he has took a giant leap into becoming more calm, more smooth in the pocket, more confident with what he's doing. He's seeing him calm down. He's seeing him gain some confidence. He's truly getting into the game. And because of all that, Riley says that is all emulating and showing up in his leadership potential and in his leadership skill, leading the other guys on the field. Going back to our great quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, when they were on the field, guys looked to them. When they were on the field, you knew who was going to hold people accountable. You knew who the other guys were looking at or relying on. Cade Klubnik hasn't shown that. Cade Klubnik hasn't been that, but Garrett Riley has faith, and it says that he's developing and going to show more of that this year. Now we get into the number 2 topic, who is the battle for the QB2. Last year, CV Christopher Vezina came out, and he was the favorite to be that QB2. This year, Trent Pierman came out in that spring game and balled out. Played better than Cade and in CV. With that being said, there's a battle going on. So they asked Garrett Riley, hey, Cade's quarterback 1, no doubt for sure. Who's QB2? And Garrett Riley didn't give an answer. He said that battle is still going on. He said they both have shown flashes of greatness in spring and summer, and that the fall is really going to go down to the battle of who that QB2 role is. Both these players are very different players, though. Christopher Vezina, just to give you a little bit of background on him, he was a four-year starter in high school, an Adidas All-American, a national top 50 player. He was a 5-star recruit, according to a lot of major prospects recruiting websites. He had almost 1,000 yards in high school, 59 passing touchdowns, 29 rushing. He came stout. Like, he had schools like Kentucky, Florida, Auburn, all recruiting him, and he came to Clemson. So that he came a high level. He was very much a high-level recruit. Trent Pierman, very different story. Pierman's a Daniel boy, meaning he came from Daniel High School, which a lot of players do at Clemson. Those boys that come from Daniel High School because it's close, they either walk on, get a scholarship, but he walked on, and he's played great. He's played great. When Dabo Swinney and Garrett Riley talk about Trent Pierman, they usually refer to his moxie, saying that he's just got some kind of moxie about him. What does that mean? There's different interpretations of that. They asked in an interview after the spring game. He had a great response. He performed really well in the spring game, like we mentioned. And they were asking him, they said, hey, Dabo, Garrett Riley, talk about your moxie. What does that mean to you? And his response was, look, I'm not 6'5". I'm not biggest guy. I'm not the strongest guy. I'm not the fastest guy. But what I do know, he said the effort doesn't go into a slump. So he's going to make sure he's always putting in the effort, putting in his best that he can. And I love that. I just absolutely love that, because it's that moxie. What that is it's determination. It's realizing, hey, I don't have the physical, God-given physical features, but I do have this God-given effort that I may give 100% of the time. Some of my favorite aspects of Pierman are, and this is what Garrett Riley talked about as well, is how he functions at a really, really high level. He acts at a high level. He can perform at this high level. Says he's intelligent. They talked about his moxiness. But then I love the fact that he's such a team player. After that spring game in that interview, they started off being like, hey, what a performance. How confident are you after that game? Do you have these hopes of being the starter one day? And I love what he said. He said that he was ready to make sure that he thrives in his role. Whether his role is helping support Cade on the sidelines, lift Cade up, be there to help show things that maybe missed, be there to help Cade supporting Cade, or if his role is to go out there and perform on the field, whatever he's called on, that's what he wants to do really well. You don't get a lot of players like that. Honestly, I think that might be the walk-on, the little bit smaller recruit coming out in him, that humbleness. I'm not saying he has anything to be less proud of than CV or Cade. I don't think that at all. But what I do think is I think something about those humble roots can create this team role player aspect. Trent's a great player. He's definitely he's confident in the pocket. For someone that's a walk-on, you wouldn't tell by his playing style. When you go back and watch the spring game highlights, he was confident. He was quick with decisions. He didn't try to be the hero. He was happy taking the short passes in the middle, the crossing routes, happy taking a little hook route on the outside. He was happy taking what the defense gave him. He didn't try to play the hero, didn't try to make the deep ball, which I love to see. That's what Clemson needs, because those allow you to make the deep ball later on. CV, though, different player. Like we talked about, he's a high-level recruit. He has the abilities. He has the size. He's 6'3". Honestly, he reminds me of Kelly Bryant with a better arm. And I think here's the big difference. I think something about CV, he just hasn't got comfortable yet. In that spring game, go watch highlights of him at Clemson. He just doesn't seem that comfortable in this. He seems a little rattled in the pocket, not sure what to do. When you go watch high school videos of him, man, he was a beast in there. And when he was on the football field, he knew he was the best one on the field. He played confidently. He played with this natural ability where it was just like, yeah, I'm great, and I'm going to show you how great I am as I score all over you. And I love that. And something has not translated from high school to Clemson to college level with that. Granted, he's young. He redshirted last year, so he's technically a freshman this year. He's a younger guy, but we just haven't seen that translate yet. Hopefully that can. Hopefully that can move up. But those two, there's the little background knowledge between those two. And Garrett Riley says the QB2 role is still wide open as they're battling coming August, coming up this camp as they head into camp. Why are we spending a whole segment talking about QB2? It's because of this. As you know, third best QBR from 2016 to 2020, 74th best QBR from 2021 to 2023. Our quarterback play has to improve. And if Cade can't play better than he did last year, there's a chance the QB2 gets to hop into some games. I mean, look at DJU. When he was struggled, he made it all the way to the ACC championship game. They pulled him out early, and QB2 Cade Klubnik came in and led to a victory. When you're QB2, especially with a quarterback who has yet to prove that he can have continuous success. Cade has proved he can have success. He hasn't proved that he can be consistent with it. And when that's the case, that QB2 becomes a lot more important, because then you're one step away from helping this program. If Cade comes out, I don't believe it's coming out, and he's going to silence doubters. But if Cade comes out and plays better, if Cade comes out and struggles, or if he has an off year, if he doesn't play well, if he doesn't put the rust in the bucket, if he doesn't play like we know he can, if that's the case, QB2 becomes important. And that's where this battle between Pierman and Christopher Vizina, that becomes super important, because now who's going to be the guy that steps in there? So I'm excited to see this battle. Going to be really important, going to be really exciting watching what happens between these two as camp goes on, battling for that QB2 role. But with all that being said, that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Clemson podcast. Later in this week, we're going to keep diving into the conference realignment, the court case, all the breaking news with that. We would also love to hear your thoughts on today's topic. Let us know what your thoughts on all the topics we talked about. Do you agree with us? What do you think about the offensive leadership? What about Dabo and the ACC? Or who do you think should be the QB2? Let us know all that. You can reach out to us on Twitter, drop a comment, anything like that. We would love to hear feedback. If you haven't, make sure to subscribe to this podcast, wherever you get your podcast at, and over on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. Leave us a review. Leave us a written review. That'd be so helpful if you could do that. We would really asking you to do that. But when you subscribe, it lets you have your first listen every single day here on the Locked On Clemson podcast. We are a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. We can't wait to see you on tomorrow's episode as we dive into more topics. But until then, keep that Tiger pride alive and roaring. And as always, go Tigers.